Hello and welcome to eCommerce Matters, the podcast brought to you by BlackCurve. BlackCurve helps e-commerce businesses make pricing decisions. Today's title is Profit-Killing Competitor Pricing Mistakes and How to Avoid Them. There we go. Where shall we start? I think it's probably just worth having a quick agenda, because I think we've got to stick with some kind of structure for these podcasts, don't we? So to set the scene, what we're going to do is we're going to start by actually looking at what do we mean by competitor pricing, because I think, what is it? Because a lot of people have some preconceptions about what it is, just to make sure we're putting our textbook foundation in which to answer this particular question of the podcast today. We're then actually going to dive into some media articles. So I hope, Rob, that you've got you've done your research and you've got a lot of good content to share on that. Just really to find out there, are there any case studies that we can maybe dive into a bit more detail about potentially where some retailers and e-commerce companies have fallen foul of using competitor pricing, and also, we're going to talk about the positives as well, where it's worked, and that sort of ties in nicely. We're going to tackle it in two halves. We're going to look at the positives of competitor-led pricing, and then we're going to move on to looking at the negatives of competitor-led pricing. We may introduce, and I'm pretty confident we will, the concept of a price war. Although I might tease you with how my alternative of what I think it should be described as, and how you should tackle the problem. And then we're going to end on actually answering the question for the podcast. So that normally does help. We'll look at how to avoid competitor pricing mistakes. It's almost like a 101 for how you should make pricing decisions. Does that agenda sound okay to you, Rob?
Yeah. Sounds bang on. It's almost like we talked about it beforehand.
Yeah, you told me before this before we actually started recording that you had prepped. So that's always a good start, isn't it? Rob, what is competitor pricing?
Yeah, so I think for the sake of this, it's worth saying that we're talking about price matching, really. So it's using competitor data to lead your pricing strategy, and that could either be to match your competitors or people who you think are your key competitors on like-for-like products, or undercutting them. I think that for me is really what I think we're talking about. Is that fair?
That's exactly it. So it's the ability to go and collect competitor prices first and foremost, to find out what else there in the marketplace, what products are my competitors selling, and am I also selling those prices? And then it's making your pricing decision off the back of what the market is doing.
So there's an interesting addendum to this that I came across in my research that I did.
I hope you're going to reference all of your sources for today.
Yeah, I can with this one, but it's a price match promise. So, and that for me is super interesting, because this is kind of like almost a manual pernicious price. It's the same pricing behavior, right? If you find the theory being, if you found a competitor with a lower price, we'll happily match that for you because we're going to lose the sale otherwise, kind of thing. And AO do it, Currys do it. So see, non-fashion, non-grocery.
Well, I was going to say that I was shopping on Wiggle yesterday. Other retailers are available, and I noticed, and not to me. I had noticed that they had a chat feature that it was price promise, as you say, and it had a chat feature, and almost instantly live you sort of share the source and they verify it, and then I haven't done it because clearly I don't shop around enough. I just purchase what I see. But obviously, if you're buying branded goods that are available elsewhere, they will just give you a code or something and match it at the checkout.
Because I think that in effect is what a lot of competitor price strategies are trying to do, just at scale. And I think we'll drill into kind of why that's a good thing, but also when that can go wrong kind of further into the podcast.
Yeah, because I mean, as you say, you just touched upon it, if you've got the person there and all the signals are saying they're going to buy, and then they give you that feedback to say, hey, I want to buy from you. Can you match this? That's a good what you've probably spent a lot of money to get them to your store. So, you better taking that order then, or you better holding your nerve. So I think I think there's lots of different directions we can go with this. So, shall we move on then to what the media is saying, or rather what your research is saying? I'll ask you to share your homework first, and then to see what I come with after that.
Yeah, because the funny thing with this is we see the world differently, so it's quite interesting, because I tend to see the world in generalities, and you tend to be a bit more specific, because all I got when I googled this stuff is that currently post-COVID there are price wars everywhere, right? And I mean everywhere. I can go through my list, but I've got PR companies, oil and gas, groceries, holidays, airfares. So not just kind of, it's not just e-commerce, it's just very much a culture of kind of almost glut of supply, right? And that is forcing people, rightly or wrongly, to have to compete on price, because businesses are in survival mode. There are kind of more, the interesting thing is the examples we know of and the case studies we've seen are kind of, a lot of them are pre-COVID as well. So a key example was ASOS, right? So they famously price matched with their competitors, and it turned out that's not why people were buying for them. They lost a load of margin because they fundamentally misunderstood the relationship with the customer. I would hazard a guess. But really, I think we've gone now to this period of people sorting their supply chains out, or online, so more relevant to our environment, or not being able to shift anything, or whether that is services or holidays or whatever. I mean, you can think of it all as a commodity, right? And then that oversupply is leading to price reductions, sale at any cost, and kind of forcing price wars. And when you get into that is just a competitor pricing loop, right? What are they selling at? Well, I need to shift this, so I need to sell less, and then they respond, and then they respond, and then you start this kind of negative downward spiral.
Yeah, because there's certainly a case of, I think some customers probably have almost inadvertently entered into a price war, just because they sort of, they might have been doing well during the pandemic, during the specific lockdown period, and then as other retailers in the sector maybe haven't done as well, if you're set up to match against them, you're almost inadvertently brought into the war, whether or not you wanted to or not, isn't it?
I completely agree. One of the key things is businesses failing and liquidation of stock. I mean, we've spoken about it before, but if that is driving prices down, the question, we talked about holding your nerve before and wondering whether you can or not, but if you're just following competitor prices, you're going to take a margin hit. And you'll be forced to if you need to keep selling.
Yeah. So I mean, were there any particular articles you wanted to raise at all? I mean, I've got one from the Sun today, because we've got to start. I don't know. Is the Sun described as Middle England? I don't know. It's sort of, how do you describe the Sun? So I think the article that they've got was High Street Shops Launch Price War as Battle of the Sales Begins with up to 70% off. And I think if you scroll down, even it's not just fashion, right? It's Curry's PC World up to 60% off. What else have they got? They've got electronic companies, appliance companies in there that are massively having discounts. What else have we got here? I mean, even just maybe to go into a bit more of the theory behind it. We got here that digitalcommerce360.com. Just as much as BlackCurve, we'd like to get all your information from BlackCurve. There are obviously other outlets there that do give detailed statistics, and it's interesting. It says Amazon is actually on average people's first port of call for shopping. So one thing that I hadn't appreciated that shopping habits is I just assumed actually it was Google and then Amazon, but they're saying here that 54.3% of consumers go to Amazon first for shopping online, and then they go to Google, which is 14.5%, and then it's the other areas. And it says that this presents a problem for retailers that want to maximize their margin, because if you're being outpriced by Amazon, it just naturally ends up being a position whereby you're just forced to go down that route, especially if you're selling on marketplaces.
Yeah, I mean the Amazon thing is a real. I mean it's my route, right? Because I mean I would say other services are available. There isn't really another service like Prime in effect where any product. I bought some visors for pub golf last night, and I get them tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really, really hard to compete with, and it's really problematic because they control the marketplace and they sell within the marketplace, which is really pernicious. Like, I know there's a lot of chat about anti-competition and the rest of it going on, but that for real retailers is really problematic, especially at a point where COVID has forced people's buying habits to change, and people really aren't comfortable. I don't want to go to a shop really now. I'll go and buy what I deem as essentials, but the drive for me to go to a retail shop and buy something there, if I know I can get it online, which is quote unquote a safer experience for me, I'm going to do that. So there needs to be some driver, and they're clearly saying the driver is price reductions.
Yeah, and I mean they go on to say that 67% of retailers have some form of price optimization system that enables them to track competitor pricing, right? And it's interesting that I suppose without giving the conclusion away, I think the turning point is the ones that are being successful are ones that are investing further in tools that don't necessarily just focus on being the lowest price product, but it allows them to also automatically raise the price. So you're focusing on profitability, profit margin, over necessarily being the lowest price product. So we won't go into too much into that now, but let's just we're teasing the listeners and the viewers at this stage just to sort of set the scene. I mean, another one I saw it was from the marketinginteractive.com, and it said opinion, the end of e-commerce as we know it. And it says that actually discoverability is a key component with the market, with you driving traffic to your website. It's a dogfight to get visibility, especially when we're talking about how can people's individuals' consumer habits is mobile related, right? So you've got less chance to get your name out there. So it says that most small businesses end up having to spend a lot of money to get discovered, and then more and more or less they're selling the same or similar product, and it usually comes down to a price war for them to win. Okay, so I hope as part of this, that I want to challenge people's, especially small businesses and newer businesses, that price obviously is one way to win. Absolutely, I'm not here to say that being the cheapest doesn't necessarily always win that order, but it's about being the cheapest when you have to, and not having that as your default setting.
Yeah, but also there's a deeper question there that thing ignores, which is about business defensibility, right? Yeah. It's the same thing we have as a tech company. It's the same thing as if the only reason people are buying for you is price, you're going to end up in a price war, right? So for a really good example of this is I don't know, say I want to do another build your own website thing, but say I find a product on AliExpress and I build a front end in Shopify and I just sell that product, right? And I hook that up. And all I've done is found a product and built a web page. That is not a very defensible business in any way, shape, or form. And really, I'm in a competition about my cost with anyone else who wants to sell that product. So if I think I'm digitally innovative enough to knock the cost base completely down, fine. Then you can compete on price, then you can undercut. Or if I'm doing it as a hobby and I don't actually need to make money, then but it's hard to think of examples at scale where lack of product defensibility, in this case, doesn't lead you into a price war. Because if someone else can pick it up and sell it easily, you really are just competing on cost base, and that's it, and kind of minimum margin.
This is where all the other factors come to play, isn't it? So like you've got to, that you can invest in customer experience and right. It's not if you're just setting up a retail outlet, or you just are going to win by focusing on price to a certain extent. That's not, you're going to be you're going to be kicking yourself and wishing that you'd done something else.
So your wiggle price match thing is a really, really good example, because again, I also shop in Wiggle. They're really good at building customer loyalty, because they stock well, they discount well, their product selection is very good. So that it is the kind of company where I think, well, if I'm going to spend the money, I'd actually rather give it to this company. And so for them, they're not competitor matching across all products, but they're happy to do it on specific products. So that becomes quite a smart strategy for me, because they know then know that they've got my loyalty. Another example I've seen of that in the press recently is there's a lot of noise about Tesco going to war on Aldi, right? Tesco's market share is still huge, but they're under pressure from these cheaper quote unquote supermarkets. And part of their strategy, aside from that, which is really smart, is to offer it to club card holders. So you bake it into the loyalty program, right? So Tesco have always been at the forefront of using customer data and using that club card data to really drive customer experience. But I think it's especially clever in this case, because you're using that to build loyalty. So you're building it in. You're using price and price matching to grow your customer base. So that, and you have to be able to make the bet that you can take the hit and win the war, right? But that is a really good snowball, so that when you come out the other side, you've changed people's behavioural patterns, right?
Because that's very different from saying, I'm just going to go out there and beat them at all costs, right? That is, you're investing in the relationship with the consumer, and that I think is a difference. And without to drag too much onto the Wiggle example, they are very much investing in the relationship first and foremost. And then it's on certain products, and also the price matching comes in later, because as we will look at, there is a time to price match, and there's a time when you don't have to price match. And if you've invested in that loyalty piece, invested in all the wrapper around that, the times when you have to price match becomes fewer and fewer and fewer, right? And it'll be interesting to see from a Tesco point of view as well, if they're only going to price, if I'm always buying, I don't know, I've got a young baby, I'm always buying nappies. Am I only going to get my price match on the nappies, as opposed to, another product that if you were shopping at Tesco's, you would get a discount on that. So I think it's interesting from that perspective. The other one that I wanted to look at is just bring in the concept of, I think, because people immediately assume that this particular piece was from Entrepreneur magazine, and it said, I think it's because it's so easy to set up an e-commerce business now, right? And you've touched upon it.
So YouTube tells me.
And I think it is this. It's not only the commoditization of the ability to set up an e-commerce business; it's the commoditization of products, and the ability for the consumer to get hold of that product from multiple locations, right? I mean, in a bygone era when we didn't have that, all you could do was turn up at your high street, and you had a couple of options, and so it was a very different feel. And I think there's then this just assumption that price becomes the sticking point. And I think this sort of says that one of the pieces we'll move on to is talking about price wars, and it's not a long-term solution, because it is very much, it creates a weaker market for everybody. And that's what the consumer might feel in the short term they're winning, but they won't still win if we're in a position where or the retailers start closing down, or because the margins aren't there, they can't invest in getting more products and more options and so forth. And so we've got to think about that.
That is the key, right? I mean, the long-term play of a price war is to destroy your competition, right? That's what you're saying. I've got better cost base, deeper pockets, whatever. I'm VC backed. Who knows? I'm going to go so cheap that no one else can afford to exist in this marketplace, and then I'm going to dominate it, right? Afterwards. And yeah, it's incredibly anti-consumer when you come out the other side, because there is no competition. There is no competition. So, and that becomes the problem.
It's whoever's got the most cash in the bank to ride it out to a certain extent, doesn't it? That's what it comes down to. So the last article, both you and maybe the podcast listeners might be pleased to hear for this stage. I've gone across. Well, I'd already gone across the pond with Entrepreneur Magazine, but this particular one is from CNBC.com, and the title says "Price Wars and E-commerce Investment to Weigh on Retailer Profits," Moody's says. And it goes on to say that retailers are engaging in pricing wars and investing in future growth as they battle for market share, and it's taking a toll on their performances. And they're predicting that profit growth is going to be cut from sort of 5 to 6% to 2 and 3%, so year on year from a growth point of view. So it's clearly we're entering in an interesting period. It felt very doom and gloom. It felt like there was a lot of negativity around this. Do you agree with that?
I think in the press there's a lot of negativity because it sells. I think from a retailer perspective, there's a lot of opportunity, and there is actually a huge amount of opportunity for smaller businesses that can be more nimble. We've spoken about this before. Because I think the real challenge is that the real trend, I think, or one of the key trends in retail, especially bricks and mortar, has been touch enabling, right? And so there's been huge investment into these really kind of cool experiences in store and elsewhere. And that is now just dead, at least short term, and at least for a year or two minimum, I would have thought, with everything that's going on. Plus with the growth, plus a massive acceleration in the growth of online. So yes, it's going to be messy. Businesses will go under. There's going to be blood on the tracks kind of thing. But there's a huge amount of opportunity. And as we mentioned, it's actually something like BigCommerce, these ecosystems exist, right? There are app stores. We're on them. You can go and click on it, install the software, and get up and running and get digital quite quickly. And that's much easier if you're a smaller business than if you've got, I don't know, 10,000 employees, 100 store locations, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, it's going to be rough, but the financial crisis was rough for a lot of people. We both graduated during them. We know how rough that was finding a job, but actually out of that, the growth out of that of companies like Facebook was exponential, right? So there's certainly opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the e-commerce sector is if they invest in the right areas, a lot of them are doing phenomenally well at the moment. I went into town earlier because I had to get my son a pair of shoes, and if I'm honest, it was frightening. And it's totally put me off. I mean, we went into Clark's actually, and they did really, really well, right? Okay, so they had all the precautions, just want to say. But my 2.5-year-old, right, he sits down to get some shoes, and they put this giant glass screen in front of him. And then the woman, the shop assistant, had a giant visor, and she basically had to help him put on the shoes and test it. And she put her arms round the screen to tie up the shoes and check they were right and measure him. And my poor boy was like, he's pretty robust, but he was just totally taken aback by it, and it was not a nice experience.
Freak me out. We've been conditioned by weird sci-fi films.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
It's just like.
So I think it's I think, I don't want this to be doom and gloom, but I think those kind of experiences are just going to encourage people even more than they have done to actually go, do you know what? I don't need to go to the high street. I've reattempted it. I'm going to actually commit to buying online.
Yeah, it's a time for innovation. So it's not going to be a good time for shareholders' dividends, right? But we're not in that phase. We're about survival and innovation. So companies that are investing well, and the real question is that's going around, I think, is what to invest in, because I don't think anyone's got any idea, and anyone will have any idea for some time, really. BlackCurve, probably, something like that. Online pricing. But realistically, it's the kind of companies that build that culture of innovation in are likely to be more successful on average than ones that don't, right?
Absolutely. So shall we bring it back in then to tackling the question? So I think it's not all doom and gloom, but I think certainly we have a lot of the media articles we've shared and the research showed, it sells, right? Negativity sells. So let's look at the positives of competitor pricing. Where does it work well?
Well, I mean, realistically, if you take an efficient market theory, you should all be around the same price. If you're all the same, it's interesting, right? Because like you're supposed to use your sales or whatever to set price, to find the optimum price for the product and the rest of it. But realistically, that's hard to do. Takes a lot of time. The quickest way to do it is for people to look at what their competitors are doing and find the right gauge and then play around with it. And honestly, not really supposed to say this, but honestly, I think it works broadly well in most normal conditions. If the market's behaving normally, the product is quote unquote normal. It's not like
It's a commoditized product.
It's an FMCG kind of thing. Yeah, it seems sensible. If you suddenly and it's interesting as well, because you can use it to work out, like, well, your cost base, the margin you want to make, and if it's wildly out of line, then that's fine. There's also it's also a lot of it is enforced anyway for the supplier side, depending on what you're doing. So really, it's also useful to work out if people are playing by the rules. I've spoken to people who part of their interest in competitive pricing data, not just in their pricing strategies, to work out that everyone's playing fair. So my short answer is that actually it works quite well most of the time, as long as things don't go mental.
Also known as a price war. Yes, I think it's. I would certainly echo that. Where we've done research whereby we've done tests where we've tried to ignore competitors on certain products, and then we've rapidly identified that has had a reduction in sales because clearly people are making their decision to buy that particular product based on price. So we've got various stats, but on average,
and actually it's worth adding to that, because when you identify those products, the only place you can go is down, right? That's the key. So, and we'll get into that in the price war bit, but realistically, you want a price match, because that in theory is the maximum, the best price to set the marketplace. It's the maximum margin you can make on a product. So let's be more scientific. For kind of highly competitive, highly commoditized, highly available goods, competitor price matching works very well, because it actually sets the ceiling on the margin you can obtain in the market.
Yeah, and it's roughly about where you have an overlap. On average, we see about 50% of the time that you have to be within the market, and we've tried to on those products, we've tried to be clever, we've tried to throw the rule book at them of looking at other data sets, and it's just the market is setting the price for those products. And no matter what you do, what other stuff you invest in, what other clever analytics you do, you've got to follow the market, and therefore doing competitor pricing is a sensible thing to do. It is a positive thing to do if you want to make sure you're selling.
And the decision around that product isn't a price-driven one, if that makes sense. It's it's a business driven one. It's, should I hold this product or not? Am I happy with the margin I'm making on that product? Because do I need to sort out my cost base, or or my supply chain, or I need to optimize somewhere else? Because there is actually very little you can do in terms of price, and you see that in the data, right? Because you see that over time, because we tend to see a lot of price moves initially for those kind of products as we kind of get them at the right point in the market based on where other people are, and then they stay static, right? Because realistically, if the market, if theoretically I should say, if the market was correct, you should be able to look at the price of it in the market and just set the price of it, because that's the market price, right? I mean, not to be too trite about it, and that really comes back to highly available FMCG like goods. I think that it works really well, and I don't think there's much else you can do, if I'm honest, from a pricing perspective.
So then, if we go on to the reverse of that, though, I mean, one of the stats that I mentioned is that on average, right? So it depends on the sector. Where there's a competitor overlap, we follow the competitor price 50% of the time. If your pricing strategy is solely competitor led, based on that, if you're applying that principle across your whole inventory, so 100% where you have an overlap, 50% of the time you don't need to follow the competitor. So therefore, if they are dropping the price and you're following them, you are giving away margin. You are essentially giving away money for free. Like you don't need to do that, and that is a negative behaviour for your business. It's gonna affect your business negatively.
Completely agree. And it's without the other. This is where the other data sets come in, but without the other data, you don't really know. That's the things. It is also very hard to know what a true competitor is and what a like-for-like product is, because there's so many factors beyond price that really impact this. Probably more than price in some cases. Ad spend, right? Accessibility, delivery time, which is the key. Like for me now, because my ability to plan is next to nil. Delivery time is probably the determining factor for me in buying a product, rather than price, quite within reason. And I will find substitute products. I know this because I did it. I was buying some waders but this is Philip does outdoor, I do fishing, but
They're both outdoor pursuits.
Yeah, both outdoors, both less useful in lockdown. But there's a shop I buy from regularly, similar, it's a Wiggle equivalent, but they've had an absolute mare during coronavirus, and I won't name names because it's not fair, but and it meant that because I'm fishing this weekend, I had to go to Amazon and prime it, and it's that is a key factor outside of price. I ended up spending probably a bit more on a slightly different product, but it was the supply and stock that was the core, and actually not the stock, the delivery time of it that was the core issue, not the price. So, and you don't know that from the data. Sorry, to loop back to what I was trying to say, I'm having a bit of a ramble there, but when you scrape the data, yes, you can get an idea of stock levels. Yes, you might be able to get an idea of delivery times. But it might surprise you, but people lie about stock levels all the bloody time, especially on their Google Shopping, because they're probably not lying about whether it's in stock or not, but the exact levels are probably not true or not. So
we have 10 plus, which means you have 10.
yeah, exactly. So there's a huge number of other factors, not just price, and that probably means you could charge I probably would have paid 10% more on the other shop because I like the other shop, actually, because I wouldn't have gone to another site and looked, and that I wouldn't have done the price comparison thing, because I like this shop. I got a good relationship with them. I bought stuff from them for years, because because they do a very good perception actually, and when I have checked in the past, that the discounts are fair, like all that good stuff that we were talking about earlier. So they probably don't have to price match at all, actually, on quite a lot of the products I buy for them, because I'm not price matching in my head. I'm not doing that. I'm sure other people are, but
so it's the classic that if you invest in your brand, if you invest in the relationship with the customer, you build loyalty, and you can't build loyalty through price, because that just treats the consumer in a fickle. The relationship's quite fickle if it's just price, I suppose. So therefore you're going to shop around.
I completely disagree with that, but I don't think you can build loyalty through competitor price through. I don't know how to phrase it, because I think through price stability and through honesty and through price, stability, robustness, these kinds of words, like fair pricing, that's the word. Through fair pricing, fair price matching, you absolutely can build loyalty through price, right? Absolutely. But it is necessary, not sufficient, I think, is the key for me.
Yeah, maybe I should have said it's a risky game to breed loyalty through simply saying I'm going to be the cheapest.
Yeah, that I completely agree with. Yeah. It's not actually necessary for the consumer, but possibly for your business.
Well, I mean, even John Lewis have they definitely about turned on their never knowingly undersold?
I don't know if it's for sure, but I had there's a number of people across the board, many industries, insurance, Aviva have stopped price matching. So there is clearly. I
was going to say, and Wilco's, which they do actually market in terms of that they are cheaper, but it's marketed in terms of valuable low products, like as in they'll be useful for you every day low prices, rather than necessarily we're price matching. They're investing in the supply chain.
This is the smart play. It's the segmentation of the inventory. If to go back to the Tesco thing, it's like, yes, match on commodity products, right? Match on bread, milk, bananas, whatever, right? Because that actually will keep people coming to your store, right? And then they'll buy the other stuff. They'll buy the more high end. I mean, I actually think Waitrose do that incredibly well, and I'll tell you for why. Because Waitrose is obviously viewed as premium. It's an expensive supermarket, but actually their basics are cheap, and they're probably roughly comparable with everyone else. And they have bougie basics, which is another good gateway drug. So you can get like basic mozzarella or whatever.
Because you absolutely need that. That's like every day.
Yeah. It is a basic. Pine nuts, actually. But the key point is that convinces you to shop there, and then you buy a load of but you buy a hell of a lot of other expensive stuff along with it, because you get into this like, oh yeah, it's fine because I'm just getting in for bread, milk, and cheese, and that's the same as everywhere else. And you come back with 2 bottles of wine, premium coffee, so X, Y, Z, right? And it's an incredibly good marketing play, and that's where like competitor price matching works incredibly well, right? In terms of as a low entry point to an upsell. So yeah, cool, come get your basics. That's great, we've got you covered. And also, when you like this, isn't it really nice? Yes, Mr. Waitrose, that is really nice. I would like that. I have one of those.
Is this a good time to tell you that I used to work at Waitrose and stack shelves? And when I was at the end of the day, you have to bring all the stock to the front of the shelf, just to make it all look nice and clean and tidy for when customers come in the next day. And one of the items was an ostrich egg that I suddenly came across, and I accidentally knocked it off the shelf and discovered that you can buy an ostrich egg for about 25 quid from so all these essentials. That wasn't in the essentials range though, I have to say, but you know, who needs an ostrich egg? Who knew, right? So, but yeah, it's right. It's like, you know, make sure I don't know, you can't be that far out on bleach, Okay, so people,
exactly.
but I mean, we had in a previous existence when we were building pricing tech for manufacturers, one of our customers was an aeronautical company, and their bread and butter product was as I was going to say WKD. That's WD-40. That's something.
that was a Freudian one.
That's a flashback to the past, isn't it, on that one? And basically, it's the lubricant for for bikes and all sorts of things. And people treat that purchase as a commodity play, right? They don't care if they buy it from you or you, but you get people on the door by competing on price with that. So you might decide to undercut, but you can undercut because you've bought well, you've bought masses of quantities, whereas other people might not necessarily have done that. So you work out what those products are, and then other products which other people might sell, you've got them through the door, and then it's like, well, I'm here now, I might as well buy the other products. But you use your data, right, on a mass scale to work out what that is.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Exactly that.
So when does a price war come into it?
The real problem with if everyone's competitor price matching, for me, it's like it feels like everyone's spinning plates, right? And it feels like a really delicate balancing act, because if it's a flash crash, actually. I don't know for any financial people out there, but you can, if you're doing it right. It's two questions. When does it happen in competitive price matching, and when does a price war happen? Price war happens for a whole host of reasons, business and otherwise. What's really interesting with competitive price matching strategies is you can start an accidental price war, right? And that's kind of like, from a pricing perspective, the worst place to be, because if you've made a strategic decision that you're going to go hell and high water on this product set or whatever, fine. What can happen is that if everyone's price matching, that's fine. But say everyone is saying, I'm going to undercut everyone else by 1%. And everyone is doing that, right? You just spiral down. So I go down one, you go down one, I go down one, you go down one. And then we say who hits their minimum margin or minimum price first. And then that's where we get stuck. And all the price wars done in the marketplace is dropped the price by X%, has probably done nothing in terms of demand, because as you said earlier, there's only a certain number of people buying a product. So really, you've all cost yourself money, right? Straight up. So that for me is the kind of, when we talk about dangers of competitive pricing strategies, it's all about margin sacrifice, like unnecessary margin sacrifice. Gross margin, I should say, because it's not like you're not discounting to increase volume, because everyone's discounting, so the price is just coming down to everyone's just losing money across the board.
So I think it comes down, in that situation, it's almost like who's got the biggest kahunas to keep going, and I would say it's you don't win anything in that point of view just because you've got bigger kahunas.
But also it's whether it's strategic or not, because a lot of the time I don't think people realise they're doing it. If I'm honest, yes, if you're saying, all right, we've taken on, I don't know, 10 million in VC backing, and our play is to dominate the marketplace, and we're going to do this. It's what Uber did, right? Other cities are available, but in London, they got the black cabbies very angry because they came in, they gave away. I remember when basically you didn't have to pay for a taxi ride because you just bounce free tickets around everyone, and it's still pretty cheap. And that is your classic dominator market play. And we said at the start, it's bad for consumers long term because you end up usually with one major player with the deepest pockets. I don't think that's the danger of competitive price matching strategies. I think the danger of competitive price matching strategies is you doing that without realizing it. So there's no strategy around it. It's just that we have just, our algorithms or our pricing behaviors have decided that we're going to discount a good by 10% for no good reason, right? That's what, because I'm competing in price with you and if we're similar enough, our cost base is about the same. Right, so we're probably going to hit about the same minimum margin, and say we can both I'm not talking about like you're going to bully me out the market here. I'm just going to just talk about just normal product behavior. We just end up selling less for less, the same amount for less. That nothing else happens out of it. Like I don't go under, you don't go under. We don't change products. Demand doesn't change. We sell about the same amount. We just sell it for less money.
And we look at each other and go, okay, right, what do we do now?
And the problem is you can't step out of it, right? Because you can't price fix, but you're inadvertently price fixing on the way down, which is kind of hilarious. That's.
But then it relies on one of them to increase the price and hope that the other person's automatically repricing off you, and then you going back up the ladder, and then you come back down the ladder. So it's very interesting. I mean, I think to come back to the 50% of the time, it is a right decision to follow, and 50% of the time it isn't. That's why I don't know if you like this term, but I'm going to say it anyway. You can tell me afterwards if you don't like it. It's the whole concept of a price skirmish. I think a price skirmish might be a better way to describe it, because absolutely there's a time where you should have a bit of a skirmish, because that you're trying to win customers, and that price, people do decide to buy from that product based on price. It's not a sexy product. It's available in lots of places. People have lots of options to buy it. Therefore, if a competitor of yours changes the price, you have to have a skirmish, and you have to follow sometimes, or you have to try and set the price and then see if they follow you back, right? But it's about using the data to then work out when do I stop doing that, and I don't just go into this pit of decline, and also when can I make decisions that aren't completely competitor led. Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
I like it, because it's price war is too grandiose for what we're talking about. We're not talking about strategic pricing, for want of a better term. We're talking about tactical pricing, just feeling about the marketplace, right? And so it's those little like those skirmish is quite a good term. Those little fights you pick, like, oh, I go a bit under, can they move, or do they? It's we've talked about it before. Actually, it's you can say, are they efficient enough? Like a lot of the time is can I take a little bit? Can I drop a little bit here and just pick up the volume because they're not paying attention? And you have to respond, right? You have to respond. But the interesting thing is that if the whole market is moving, I guess, rather than players within the market, that's the difference. Nobody's winning, right? I mean, short term, the consumer's probably winning a bit, but longer term, maybe not, because actually the competitive price movement says nothing about consumer demand. And I think that's the key bit. It just says about, like you say, who's got the biggest kahunas, you or your competitor.
No, we like clever kahunas here, so not just having big kahunas for the sake of it. So maybe that's a good segue to go into how, what does it mean to have clever kahunas? How do you avoid these pricing mistakes? What sort of the 101?
The key thing as always is really, I think we say this a lot, but it's data. It's knowing. It's client. I've just written what I've read, what I've seen on the screen. What it is it's about overlaying your data sets, right? So it's understanding your inventory enough to know whether to make a pricing decision or not, whether it's competitor led or otherwise. It's proper fundamentals, really. Because it's I think a lot of what we've been talking about today is just making decisions blindly rather than strategically. And you can do it automatically, but you just have to understand you have to build in the rules or the algorithm or however you want to do it to kind of have the nuance of your business need. Because if you're just going out and saying, I'm going to match everyone, some of it will work, some of it you have to, but for a lot of it you probably don't, and you're just losing money. So you need to understand, I'd say, that which 50% you don't have to do that on and why. And whether actually, if you're dominating those, whether you can invest elsewhere. And how do you shift the thing I don't think we're going to have time for today, but I think is really interesting is how do I take that 50% that are price led and then force them out of that? Which is an odd thing for someone in a pricing company to say, but it's really good. The more products that you can stop being competitor led and then put you in control, so you become the price setter, not the price taker, that will let you dominate the market, right? That will let you maximize your margin because you're suddenly making the reason people are buying independent of a pure price decision, which means you're unlikely to end up in this race to the bottom.
No, absolutely. And I think it's trying to work out within the 50% that you might find out that you do a piece of strategy work which says, hey, if I invest in a bit of PPC on Google Shopping, that turns the needle for me, and I can actually be more expensive than the competitor. And the money that I invest in Google Shopping in this particular instance might massively be less than partaking in that particular price war. Okay, and there just as an example of why sometimes you don't need to follow, right? I think for me, we've looked at it on previous webinars and podcasts in terms of how you identify those competitor products in itself. But one of the really simple ways is to set up your monitoring and have a look over the course of a couple of weeks, and see which products are changing more frequently than others. And that typically means that those products are market-led, are maybe one of the more commodity-based products, and that in itself gives you a great sub-segment to say, well, actually, these are my, it might be 50%, it might be plus or minus, but these are the ones that I should absolutely follow on. And then it's doing the next research of how do I strip out more from that 50%. Okay, I mean, some of the other data sets that we use here at BlackCurve is looking at your sales history. So looking at if competitors undercut you and you don't follow them, so you need a robust structure, robust software in there, like BlackCurve, to, plug there, to help you rapidly and quickly keep a view of that, of if your competitors undercut you, is your sales impacted? And if your sales is not impacted, that would then indicate that people are not making the decision to buy from you based on purely a competitor price. You've invested in other areas, you've invested in the relationship, people trust you, people have loyalty to you. And during the pandemic, certainly, competitor pricing, it was much less, a lot of our decisions were much less related to competitor data because of the supply chain issue. And this is where your stock level data comes in. And you touched upon it today, that if your competitor doesn't have stock and you have stock, you don't need to follow them, right? Okay, so it's introducing a whole plethora of other views on your business and applying them to this pricing decision question. I mean, even the weather might play an impact on it, right? And
seasonality is huge, right? Yeah.
And you might be able to get that to your advantage, because I mean, we've one of the stats we said at the beginning is that 67% of businesses have some form of price monitoring tool. Within that, it'll be good to find out how many of them are actually doing repricing and what frequency are they doing it. Are they actually just simply looking at it and then acting on it on an ad hoc basis? And that's when you can start to apply technology to win. And then on the flip side, if 33% of businesses don't have any price monitoring technology, if you're fortunate enough to be in one of those sectors where your competitors haven't invested in it, again, you have an opportunity to win and land grab there. So I think we've covered a lot of ground there. I mean, is there anything else that you particularly like to share or end with, Rob?
No, I've done the classic thing of starting an interesting thought just in the last 5 minutes of the podcast. I think we'll save how you move products away from being competitor driven for a later thing. But
you just volunteered yourself for another podcast or webinar on that particular topic, Rob. So you're 2 for 2 now on that front. So so thank you very much, Rob, for joining me today. We've been tackling the question: profit killing competitor pricing mistakes and how to avoid them. I think it's important to say that there's a 50-50 play here. 50% of the time, actually sometimes on average following your competitor is the right thing to do, but it's everything, the wrapper around that. So what do you do the other 50% of the time? You've got to make sure that you're using the data sets that are available to you to make those smart decisions. And absolutely do not enter in a price war. Okay, right? Okay, avoid it at all costs.
Unless you want to.
Unless you're doing as a strategic play. But I still sort of stand here and say that's sort of short term maybe gain and not long term profitability. So so thank you very much. This has been E-commerce Matters podcast, brought to you by BlackCurve. You can find us on Spotify and all various other media outlets. We're BlackCurve. We help businesses make pricing decisions. Thank you.